Okay, good morning. We're in the middle of the Hemshech of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the discourse in Tofres Tzadik Daled 5694 on page 85, which corresponds with Ayin Beis, volume 2, bottom of page 1149, 1150, all in the discussion of the third interpretation of the channel that we're calling the Ayin Beis, that we're calling the channel, or the interface between Yesh HaMiti, Yesh HaNivra. But now we've gone into, probing deeper into the nature of the Kav. This third interpretation is a Mamala Kalam, meaning in the energy that relates, that is there to create and relate to existence, the divine energy. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, in following what the Ayin Beis says about the Kav creating Milo Mata, the Kav creates structure, and basically it regulates the flow. So that which is higher in the Kav is considered Milo, a higher level, lower is a lower level. The Tzimtzum allows for that space. So Frierdiker Rebbe now went into discussion. So how did Ribui and Ischalkus come from Echad HaPashut? How did a multitude and diversity come from unity? And initially brought the Pardus's answer, that it comes through the Kalim, not through the Eir. Said it's not sufficient answer, and said that ultimately the answer, which really negates the question in the first place, that ain't pircha be'emes less pircha klal mikara. He says because it's coming, because Atzmus is kol yachol. He's beyond any form of definition and no definition. And therefore the Shleimus is capable of everything, capable of including multitude and diversity. Bringing the Avedus HaKedesh and the Maral, that's a Shleimus. That same way he has the power to create the finite. And the same thing, the power to create a multitude. Good. That's the power of real pshittus. So essentially, that concept is based on that unity was a contradiction to the multitude. And now we know that God is beyond it all. So now in chapter 21, I'm just summing up, he said, and this is the meaning of the word kol yachol. Kol yachol. He's capable of everything. And he says, even though this is an unbelievable expression, describing something that's capable of everything, would seem to be, okay, now I understand that we are not capable of everything, meaning we, human beings and all creations. Even Ein Sof is not capable of everything. Only Atzmus is. So what better description of Atzmus is Kol Yachol? He says no. Even though Kol Yachol means you can do apparent opposites. And it said Gam Ha'atzmim, meaning even fundamental paradoxes, the way I explained it. And that's completely beyond even what he says, Mashalamayla Megeder Move Hashagasenu Klal. So beyond the domain, the realm of Movi, that we don't even have an approach to it. It's completely a different reality. Nevertheless, it's still not sufficient to describe Atzmus. Because you can't describe Atzmus with anything, even the word Kol Yachol. So what could you say? You could say Kol Yachol indicates an Atzmus. Atzmus. It indicates Atzmus, because only Atzmus can do everything. But so in other words, it indicates Atzmus because only Atzmus can do everything, but it doesn't define Atzmus, because Atzmus is beyond that too. And he compared it to what we learned earlier about Beire, that the same thing with like with the word creator. Even though only God could create, true creation, still Beire is also not a toyar. It only indicates an Atzmus. You cannot call it a toyar. So what could you say? You could say that from the effect, meaning the creation, and the same thing from the fact that God creates multitude and diversity, tells us, gives us some sense, the word he uses, maybe let's first start with creation. The Beire gives us The exact translation, hasogas, it brings us liidei hasogas. In other words, it brings us toward an understanding of the grandeur or the awesomeness or the magnitude, the wonder, a musig of mechuyev hametzius, of something that must exist. Nothing in existence must exist. Creation gives us some entry into relating to something that must exist. So he says the same thing with Kol Yachol. Just like Beira does that, it indicates on, let's call it a feature of Atzmus that's unique to Atzmus, exclusive to Atzmus, and yet doesn't define it. The same thing with Kol Yachol. Hakinu Kol Yachol, who Hakoras Sichlis. Slowly, as I said, Hakoras Sichlis, which means an intelligent recognition. Hakora is recognition, resonance, but a recognition is the clearest word. Bahaflos ha'atzmus mizbarach v'yasala. Again, haflos, in the wonder, in the awe, in the magnitude, the grandeur. Now he adds, and this is the addition. He says haba. He doesn't say ubafrat, and specifically neshamas. He just says it as a matter of fact that this comes due to the hakoras haneshama. The neshama has something in it that instinctively, in the word I wanted to use, intrinsically, has a recognition. And he gives the example of a child and a parent. So hakoras haneshama, the neshama is Yisrael. I'm reading it again. Makirim ba'atzmus yisbarach, that the souls of Israel recognize in atzmus yisbarach. Like a child that may not understand that like he says, kamoy kedugmas dover, an example for this, kamoy hatinuk, like a child. Dagam she'eni yedei klal maze av, even though it has no understanding at all. What is a father? You know, a child can't go and start explaining what a father is. U'makol mokim makirei, and nevertheless the child recognizes the parent. V'nimshach elov b'amshach atzmis, and he's drawn to him in a core, essential, I guess the word is, I don't want to say magnetism, being drawn to. Yeah, he uses the word nimshach and amshacha atzmis, which means it's not incidental. It means it's not acquired. It's not a superficial thing. It's something in the child that, because a child is essentially connected to its parent, it has that being drawn to it, has nothing to do with seichel. And then he adds, V'hakorazu, clearly Friedrich Rebbe realizes that he's just added neshamis. So before you said it's hakora that comes from hakora sichlis ba'aflos, and he actually compared it to beira, and there he didn't even bring the shamas. So Friedrich Rebbe continues and says, V'hakorazu, this essential recognition that a neshama has in atzmus, bo'agam, it also manifests ba'hakora sichlis, in an intelligent recognition. In other words, there's something here that also the mind relates to. I don't think the point here is so much that it's rational, but meaning that you can when you see kol yachol, you see suddenly, let's say, mokam adon eina min amida. You see that the space of the ark doesn't occupy space. It right away indicates to you, your mind tells you what made this happen here. This is really, like we said before, meshtachim revochim. That was the example he used a little earlier, if you remember, that they stood in the Beis Hamikdash, they stood tight, and yet when they had to bow, there was space. How's that possible? So he said it was mokim and not mokim together. I just want to see, did he use it on Kol Yachol? Why did he bring that? Where was that? Do you remember where it is, anybody? A few pages back. Just reminding myself, because we then discussed, why didn't he bring Mokum Adon Eina min Amida?
He was talking about what we're able to understand, the difference between chazin, from the Achora, or from seeing straightforward, the ability we have, just a page ago, maybe.
You remember where it is? What page number?
Yeah, it looks like it's 82.
82. Okay, good.
Yeah.
82. Good. Thank you. Right. What was he saying there? Oh, Echze. Right. Okay. One second, a second. Yeah, Move Klali Lenyonim Atzmim, yeah. Yeah, that was that piece where he said how we understand things above through Mepsari Echze Lekah. We don't fully see it. In the Beis HaMikdash, they saw it. Okay, good. So what do we see from this? So he brings two things together here. The neshamas have an intrinsic sense and recognition in their father, in their parent, in Atzmus. But it also manifests in Hakara Sichlis. That's what he says now. The Amitis Inyan Ein Seif, the Amitis Inyan, the true Ein Sof, is Hu Ablik Vul HaAmiti. Okay, we're gonna learn what that means in a minute. So I would just say the following before we continue: that it's clear that there is something about neshamis that have a certain essential sense because of their connection. But it's also clear that he's not just relying on that he's bringing it into something that is also his bonus. That when you see something, you see a kol yachol, or better, your mind tells you that atzmus is something that's completely beyond us. The aflos atzmus. So it's not a contradiction. I'm pointing it out. I will say when you go back, remember I pointed this out when we spoke what was the page? 27 with Avram. Yeah. On page 27 was also very reminiscent of that he spoke Tachas Hayidiyah Shalei Neda, that the mind leads you to a place of something beyond, but the only way you can experience it is really, he said, through Hergish, Haneshama, Margish. I'm just looking here, in Gifil. And then there was one more line I want to indicate. On page 28, if you remember, he said, as much as our mind can understand godliness and ruchnius, there's a limit. But then, machmas aval mechesed Hashem aleinu hini b'yediyasenu zu onichem l'shar b'yediyah demetzias amachus. In other words, he brought in also a thing of chesed Hashem, that God bestowed upon us a kindness, a benevolence that also allows us to reach deeper. So you see three things here: what we can reach on our own, what God gives a chesed, and then the neshama part that can apparently have its natural intrinsic sense and recognition. So I don't think it's a contradiction. I think it's just different factors in experiencing something beyond us. So I just wanted to make that point. But he does bring here neshamas, which I'm not sure why he insists on bringing it. It's probably part of understanding the whole interface.
Which page is this?
Which page is what we're learning now? Or what?
Chesed Hashem.
28.
Thank you.
Yeah, 28. The beginning of the chapter 9. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue on. What we're continuing now is again, so Kol Yachol, what he's saying, we also have the Akara Sichlis, which means when you see something beyond rational, it tells you about, like you said, the creation tells you about Mechuyev HaMetzias, and Kol Yachol teaches you about the Haflos HaMusig. I'm sorry, Akara Sichlis B'Haflos Atzmus is Baruch. Okay. Now he's introducing these words. What is the Akara Sichlis? That the true inyan of Ein Sof, Hu Habli Gvul HaAmiti. That true Ein Sof is not Ur. Ur is also Ein Sof, because it's a reflection of Atzmus. But the true Ein Sof is Bli Gvul HaAmiti, which means a Bli Gvul that's not defined by being Bli Gvul. That's the key thing he's going to say. Let's read it inside, and we'll understand this line, because he just throws in this line. This is where we stopped. Let's continue reading. And we'll come back to this line. What is he saying? Bli Gvul HaAmiti. What does that mean? Before he said, Kashem Shekeichei, just as he has the power to create Bli Gvul, he has the power to create Gvul. So I'm assuming he's saying Bli Gvul HaAmiti means not bli gvul that he has the power to create bli gvul, because he also has the power to create gvul, but bli gvul amiti would be the bli gvul that's beyond bli gvul. In other words, a true bli gvul is that he's not limited to bli gvul, right? That's what it seems to me, but I don't want to jump. Let's read inside. So he says, we're on the line, it's 6 lines from the bottom of page 85, in Hemshech Tzadik Daled, 5694. So he says like this, V'hainu, this means, Amitis Hashlila Mekol Dover. The true negating of anything. So bli gvul you can translate 2 ways. There's a thing called finite, okay? Finite set of numbers. 1 goes on, but it'll never reach infinity. A second thing is infinity. It doesn't have an end. Bli gvul. But there you have 2 tracks. So if you say something is bli gvul, you're saying it's not gvul. If you're saying it's gvul, it's not bli gvul. So even though, yes, bli gvul is far greater than gvul, infinite is greater than finite, but it still has a limit. The limit is it's not gvul. So he's saying true bli gvul means you're negating everything, even the word bli gvul. Like we said earlier, you cannot say that he's even kol yachol. You cannot say that he's only limited in oneness or in keichag bli gvul. Continuing reading, v'shlilas hashlila, shlilas hagvul, v'shlilas habli gvul. Okay, there you have it. This language is actually a Samach Vov language, very famous line in Samach Vov. In Vayelach, Samach Vov, he says these words that Atzmus, you cannot define by saying he's this. You also can't define by saying he's not this. So you say Shlilas HaChiyuv, you can't say he's this, and you can't say he's not this. So he ends up being not this. Because Shlilas HaShlila, if you say Shlilas HaChiyuv, you can say he's not a table. Okay. But maybe he's something else. But Shlilas HaShlila means you can't even say he's not something. As soon as you say he's not something, you're also defining it. So bli gvul, the first interpretation, it's not gvul. It's bli gvul, it's very powerful, but it's not gvul. You can't say that on Atzmus. So Shlilas HaChiyuv, you can't say he's this, and you can't say he's not this. Shlilas HaGvul, meaning you say he's not gvul, and Shlilas HaBli gvul, and you can't call him bli gvul either. Umamela hu hakol. So that tells us mamela that he's everything. Means he's everything and he's nothing, to be more precise. But he means here everything that there's no limit. Nothing is a limit, which is a chiddush, because most people would say God is bli gvul. We're gvul, God is bli gvul. We're mortal, God is immortal. We're temporary, God is eternal. So it's true, God is eternal, but it's still not. He's not limited to being eternal. Ubechlolos, and in general, when we say he's everything, in general it means both the power of bli gvul and the power of gvul. That's what it ends up being. Because if he's not defined by one thing, and he's not defined by by the negation of it, so basically he has it all. So he's both keichag bli gvul and keichag gvul. I just want to emphasize, you see, it doesn't say that Atzmus is gvul bli gvul. He says keichag gvul and keichag bli gvul. Keichag bli gvul and keichag gvul. Because remember, we're not trying to define that Atzmus is bli gvul or gvul. Atzmus you can't define by anything. But the power, his capacity, is in everything. That's the key thing. Keiche. So even though he does say the language hu hakel, but in a way you could say keiche bakel, or you could say there's no concept of kayach even,
which means yicholes,
right?
Not
right,
koyach.
right. Like the last line of the previous paragraph. Look, sheyechelte bakel. I'm just pointing out sometimes the word is yecholte bakel, sometimes hu hakel. It really technically doesn't make a difference beside atzmus, because yecholte and being is the same thing. By us, potential and actual are not the same. But if you say by atzmus yecholte bakel, that's like saying hu hakel. Just wanted to make that point. Okay. Now continuing. So b'chlol is this is the power of the infinite and the power of the finite. The keich habli gvul ukeich ha'achdus. So now, remember before, when he brought the Avedus HaKedesh and the Maral, it seemed like the same idea, but the Avedus HaKedesh was talking about bli gvul and gvul, infinite and finite, the power of infinite and power. Maral was talking about achdus and ribui. Now he's saying, interesting, he's bringing them together. It's the first time he's doing this, even though we speculated as much. He's saying, keich habli gvul ukeich ha'achdus. Keich habli gvul is the power of unity. The keich ha'gvul ukeich ha'ribui. And the keich ha'gvul is the power to create a multitude, which makes sense. Because bli gvul means it's everywhere. It's no limit. So it's like really a oneness that's everywhere. When you say gvul, you're immediately saying, what does gvul mean? Finite structures. So that right away tells you there's more than one. So bli gvul indicates on unity because it's all bli gvul. And gvul means, gvul would be, there's yam, yabasha, land, sea, light, darkness. I mean, I'm just using daimim, tzameach, chaim, daber. In Lamaila El Yenim would be levels, Eir, Simtsum, Kav, Elamis, Svirus. So all this, as soon as you say Keich HaGvul, he's saying the Keich HaRibui. It's definitely an additional piece he's adding right now. So basically, Keich HaGvul is Achdus, and Keich HaGvul is Keich HaRibui, the power to create many. The Pshitas Ha'atzmus. And this all is the explanation of what we're capable of understanding about Atzmus. The Pshitas Ha'atzmus, the seamlessness or the shapelessness, Pshitas. Remember, we learned the word Pshitas means when it's completely shapeless, as seamless was a better word. It's seamless. So Pshitas Ha'atzmus, which means, as we learned earlier, Pshitas Betachlis. Completely shapeless, you can't even define it by bli gvul. You can't define it by achdus and everything. So he says, Pshitas Ha'atzmus machriach, the word machriach again, beis ein yonim. It compels us to say both things. Shenesa eshneim, that atzmus carries. The word nesa is a very key word, because you're not saying, because you don't want to define him by that. Like, for example, if you said an all-powerful person, he's capable of lifting the greatest weights, the heaviest weights, and the lightest weights. So then you don't say he relates to it. Nesa means he carries the capacity. It's like more removed from what he's capable of. So he's Nesa Eshneim, both of them, the bli gvul and gvul, the Achdus and Ribui. Uba Atzmus hinei Achdus v'Ribui. And in Atzmus, the Achdus and the Ribui, I said this earlier, but now he specifies it. The oneness, the unity and the multitude. Shezeu habli gvul v'agvul, like he just explained. That's the infinite and the finite. Einam hofchim. In Atzmus, they're not even opposites. In our minds, they're opposites. But in Atzmus, they're not opposites. It's not like, oh, God is so great, he can bring together opposites. There's no opposite. The whole opposites come later. There's no paradox. It's all Einam hofchim. Mipnei shakol hu Atzmus. Because everything is Atzmus. Dehine be'agiluyim, bigiluyim, you're going to contrast it. In giluyim, giluyim means the things that are already defined, manifest in some way. Remember, Atzmus doesn't manifest in any way. We learned the expression built in Mitzias Nimtza. However you relate to it, it doesn't manifest. Giluyim manifests. So Hari, Keich habli gvul, ene keich hagvul klal. So in Giluyim, which is a clear manifestation, the power of bli gvul is not at all the power of gvul. You can't, two different tracks completely. V'chein keich hagvul, turning the page 86, and same thing the other way around. The power of finite, ene klal keich habli gvul, is not the power of infinite. They're very different. And therefore, hine habli gvul ene yochel lekabel es hagvul. That's why bli gvul cannot contain or cannot receive. He means it cannot relate to the gvul. V'agvul ene yochel lekabel es bli gvul. Well, it's more than relate to. Lekabel means that something that's infinite doesn't have room for something that's finite, and something that's finite doesn't have room for something that's infinite. It would be like saying, in a finite room, I could put infinite objects. No, you can't. In a finite room, you could put finite objects. On this table, you could put 1,000 apples, but not 2,000 apples. So gvul does not have capacity for bli gvul, which tells you they don't come together. And the opposite is also true. Bli gvul is bli gvul. I mean, you could ask the question, it's true, a limited room can only contain limited items, finite items. Why can't bli gvul also contain finite? Because remember, we're talking about the concept of bli gvul. Obviously, infinite numbers include also finite in a certain way, but they don't really. The infinite set of numbers is not made up of 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a different reality. It's a different qualitative reality. Bottom line is two completely different domains. And one does not receive and relate to the other. That's Giluyim. Aval ba'atzmus. Harishneim hem atzmus. But in atzmus, that's not the case because in atzmus doesn't manifest. This is all when there's manifestation. Bli gvul manifests as bli gvul. Gvul manifests as gvul. Infinite is not finite. Finite is not infinite. In atzmus, they're both atzmus, which means they're not about gvul and bli gvul. They're about atzmus. V'rak onu. This line is a little blurry. If you don't read it clearly, I'll read it. V'rak onu teifsim es ha'atzmus yeser be'in. Let me stop for a second. Okay, he's going to say something, a new point now. I want to just explain this a bit, what we just learned. Because it could be words, and they're very poetic, and it sounds right. But if you really want to appreciate it, remember, we're dealing with an entity. I don't even want to call it an entity. We're dealing with a reality, atzmus, that is not just that we cannot relate to, that it's beyond us. It's beyond because it's not bichlal defined by even beyond. So the mere fact that we're talking about it poses a conundrum, because we are structured creatures, we're existing entities, and we're talking about something that's completely not like us. But I say completely, I don't mean like bli gvul is not gvul. It's completely not bli gvul either. So you have to ask yourself, how much can we really relate to this? I mean, we could talk about it. So I think this brings us back to what he said earlier. The fact of the matter is that there's three things going for us. One is that our minds were created by God, and the mind has the capacity to go to places that are even beyond logical. I mean, you see all the time, people fantasize, you can dream about and all kinds of crazy things that are not rational. On a negative way and in a positive way too. You can fantasize, you can dream and imagine realities that are beyond our own. So first of all, the capacity of the mind is working for us. It's able, through a process of imagining, surmising, extrapolation, and especially chiyuv and shlila, by saying something is something, it's not that, and then it's not that. So the mind has a way of being stretched. Emotions can't do that, by the way. Emotions are far more subjective. I experience something, like to say, I love you, I care about you. That's an emotional reaction. That's a personal, internal reaction. It's very profound in the intimate sense because it's personal, but emotions are not made to go and start saying, would you love something if it was something that's not even a reality? Emotions relate to something. I see something, I experience it, I relate to it. It's only seichel that God gave the human being ability to go to places beyond us and self-interest. That's really what makes the seichel of a human being unique. An animal seichel could be very shrewd. It's called seichel das hanikna, but it's shrewd in survival. How to hunt, how to breed, how to find a mate, how to protect its young. And it's all wired in. You never see an animal sitting and imagining things or, sitting and just pondering or daydreaming about a better reality or better world. It's the human being that has the capacity to dream of a better world and work toward creating a better world. We would never have created technology or sent a man to the moon or done anything if we didn't have that type of mind that is able to go to places beyond possible. Someone would come to you 200 years ago and say, give me an investment of $5. I'm going to create a flying ship, a plane. You look at them and say, you're crazy. Birds fly, human beings don't fly. It's a nice fantasy, but we don't fly. Well, there were some people who were a little crazy, the Wright brothers and others, who, you know what, they had a dream, which was not seemingly possible. How could you create? You can't even have even a feather falls to the ground due to gravity. You're going to create something that weighs who knows how many tons flying in the sky. But the human mind has the ability to dream, has the ability to go beyond seemingly our own natural capacity. And you find that's not even a miracle. They figured it out. Technologies. My point is that the first thing going for us is that we're able to go with our minds to places we ourselves are not there. We can't even jump up 20 feet, let alone fly in the sky. Just as one example among millions of technological breakthroughs. The second thing going for us, that's why I brought those, that is on page 28, the chesed of Hashem. Hashem gives us more strength and ability to relate to things that we ourselves cannot come to. Now, it works hand in hand. Anyone that's invented anything will tell you, I feel I was helped from Sayayta Deshmaya. There was some help from above. It wasn't my own work. That's point number 2. And point number 3 is the neshama part. Being that the neshama is mushrish and atzmus, the words he's used here, the neshama, like a child with a parent, so we have an additional component within us that allows us to experience things that are beyond our natural parameters. So I'm only saying it because when we're reading these ideas, they're so beyond. And this is, I'm telling you, this is not common. In Chassidus, you don't have, you know how many times you've asked me about Atzmus and so on. You don't usually have it in my Morim, the discussion about Atzmus so directly like you have here. It started in Ayin Beis, but the Friedrich Rebbe is taking it to another level here. And literally talking about Atzmus, that Atzmus that can't even be defined by Kol Yochel. Can you imagine? Even Kol Yochel is not a definition. It's an indicator, but not a definition. So I just wanted to make this point. So essentially, we live in the world of Giluyim. We can't even think of Gvul and Bligvul together, let alone something that's beyond Gvul and Bligvul. We're Gvul, and Bligvul for us is already a fantasy. And yet, at the same time, we are talking about it. So I just wanted to give a little respect to the subject matter and not just read another line and say, oh, great, okay, now we got this under our belt. No, we don't, because this is quite difficult to really experience, but our minds are able to go there, and with God's help and with the neshama's help, we're able to some form of, I don't know the word for it, this is, whether it's imagine, whether it's understand. I wouldn't use the word understand, because like I said, just like trying to, if you saw the Odin Einamin Amida, or you saw people standing tight and then they can bow and prostrate themselves without any issue, you'd say, I don't know, it's a miracle. I don't understand the thing. It's something happening here that I don't relate to. But you still can say, I'm experiencing it to some extent. Anyway, I just wanted to, as I said, I just felt the need to explain this a bit, that we're dealing here with something extremely, extremely beyond. It's about Haflos Atzmus. That's what he's saying. This is giving us a taste in Atzmus, and still not defining him. Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Yes, sure.
When the Rebbe uses the term Achdus V'Riboy, the previous page, Hini Achdus V'Riboy, Stebligbol of the Gvul, Eino Hapachim. I always thought Achdus shows on unity of plurality. Like we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Echad is not Yochid. I thought Yochid shows on singularity. Achdus shows on unity of plurality. So wouldn't it be, I mean, why would the Rebbe say, Hine Yochid V'Hariboy Stebligbol V'Gvul? Because it doesn't seem like those are two opposites. Achdus and Riboy.
So a few things. A few things. First of all, what you're doing is bringing other Mamorim into this. When you learn this, you don't hear any Yachid or Echad. He's not making that distinction. This comes from other Mamorim that you learned. So generally speaking, Yachid, when you say Achdus, Hapshuta, it includes all levels of Achdus. Echad includes Yachid. That's a general answer. So here he's not interested in distinguishing because it's not the topic matter. He's not discussing Achdus here. He's discussing Atzmos. So when you're talking about Atzmos, the word Echad includes Yachid, includes every way of form of unity that you can imagine, even more than Yachid, by the way. There's other levels too. So the point being here, that here's not really relevant, that what you learn in other Maimorim about Echad and Yachid. Here's just the issue of Echad and Ribui. Meaning, is it utter oneness or is there a multitude? So that's a general answer to your question. This is common in Chassidus. Many places you use a word that other Maimorim may go and start breaking down different levels. But then with one word, Echad includes everything.
Could you give an example for the Atmos that it's not Gvul and it's not Bli Gvul? In this place, there's no Gvul and Bli Gvul. Atmos.
I don't think we can give an example, because if it was an example, there's nothing like Atzmus. Only Atzmus is this reality. Examples are only the power of Atzmus. It manifests in Mishtachvim Revochim. It manifests in Mokam Adonai Min Amida. But you're not going to find a reality that has all this together. We do have, as I mentioned, from Ageres HaKedesh, Mitziyusim Atzmusei, we can relate to a bit in our own hergish, the fact that we don't feel we have a creator, and we don't, and the yesh is ma'ayin ve'efes hamuchlat, which means you cannot identify any source. That is giving us somewhat of a taste, if you wish, in mitzusei matzmusei. Creation, like we learned before. Kol yachol gives us a moira ala atzmus. But to really relate to atzmus in the way you're just asking me, I think the only way to do that is through complete bittul. I don't think we can find a seichel dika way to really explain it. The only thing you can say is that seichel compels us that Atzmus's reality is so unlike ours that for him the concept of paradox is not an issue. There is no paradox because there's no levels. So I think the way to go is through chiyuv, shlilas hachiyuv, shlilas hashlila, until you come and say, you know what, this is something that my seichel comes to relate to it by negating every other possibility. And then you start getting some sense of it. Now, of course, through Avedus Hashem.
That's what it means, right?
What?
Metzius bilti metzius nimtzo.
Yeah, in general, it means it's existence like no other existence. As a matter of fact, it's an existence we wouldn't even call existence, because our existence is Giluyim. It's defined by existing. Like, for example, if I said to you right now these words, here, Simon Jacobson is speaking to you on the camera right now. We're learning Ayin Tzadik Dalet, and he's not here. That doesn't make any sense. Either I'm here or I'm not here. The concept that I'm here and not here at once doesn't make any sense to us, because Metzias by definition means it exists. You can't say something exists and doesn't exist. So,
except in a quantum environment, quantum.
Yeah, but quantum is still, even at the end of the day, yes, quantum is that place of indeterminism, probability, but it's still, no one calls it Bilti Metzias Nimtza. You won't call it that. You'll just say it's not a deterministic state until it's measured, or however they explain quantum's reality. So yes, quantum gives us a sense of something.
The quantum is a blig gvul. Blig gvul. What Atmos is above it. He's not blig gvul.
No, I wouldn't call quantum blig gvul. No, quantum is not blig gvul. Quantum is a state. Quantum is a place where two realities have not yet become defined, and therefore they're both equally possible. It's a state of basically like a psharius, samitzias. But I would not call it. It's like more. It's a state that has not yet been defined. It's almost like, not exactly, but it's like we spoke about chalemus, dreams. The Rebbe gives this example, that before you interpret the dream, a dream can go in different directions. So it's still amorphous. Or even the fact that right when the child is conceived, they say it could be male and female. In other words, there are things that are not yet shaped. They're in a state of shapelessness, But it's an example a bit of not having a completely defined existence. But quantum mechanics is very definable, meaning there's a lot of parameters there. It's just different parameters, not the ones we're used to. Like, for example, you say 1,000 apples can fit on this table, but how many subatomic particles are inside this table? Oh, that's a whole different way of thinking, because it's space is understood differently and time as well. But here we're talking about something that is completely beyond. When I say beyond, this doesn't mean the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, is speaking about it. I think this compels us to be very honest. We have to avoid the temptation of trying to understand this. This can only really be experienced if you let go. You have to let go. You know, they say Simchas Torah. So Simchas Torah is you're not sitting and learning, you're dancing with a wrapped up Sefer Torah. But even that can have its siyur. I'm dancing, I have 10 minutes to dance, then I have to go eat. Or, you know, even Bligvul of dancing on Simchas Torah can also have its, what do they say, spontaneous dancing at 9 p.m., you know? So it has a spontaneity, but it's still, but imagine, can you really completely let go without even a rationale? Not saying, you know what, I'm going to let go now. Completely letting go means that you eliminate and surrender yourself totally to something greater. So I really believe, honestly, from a Veda point of view, the only way to enter here truly, the Chassidim that entered in places like this were the ones that were not thinking about what they're going to eat for their next meal, and they were not thinking about whether they're going to be on COL and whether their company is branded, etc. They completely didn't think about themselves. You let go, and then suddenly you're absorbed by something greater. That, to me, ultimately, shlilas achiv and shlilas ashlil is not just an intellectual process. That's the beginning. That's why he said it's sichlis, akara sichlis. But I think at the end of the day, it's really the concept of completely letting go. Did any of you ever completely let go? It's not that easy, because you always want to hold on to one speck of existence. But completely letting go is, my opinion, the way. What Hashem said to Moshe, you want to see me? Let go. You're not going to see me because you want to see me. This isn't a spectacle. It's not like, okay, we're going to go see God. It doesn't work that way. And you could say, okay, does that mean I have to be annihilated? No, that's not annihilation. It means you have within your neshama the capacity to let go. And when you do, deeper truths emerge. I mean, we always use the words ego gets in the way, self-interest gets in the way. That's on a low level. Here you're talking about, even forget about ego per se. We're talking about completely my existence doesn't matter, because I'm right now becoming absorbed in the true reality. Now, how deep each of us can go there, I'll just say it. I think it's very much dependent on the earlier levels. What you do on the lower levels will depend how you go into the higher levels. So everybody can reach this. Sometimes it's through saying kukuriku. Sometimes it's through pure pshittus. As a matter of fact, people who don't know a lot can in some ways touch atzmus more than people who know, like we spoke about, because they just don't have giluyim in the way. So their pshittus, their lack of any sophistication allows them to touch atzmus that's beyond sophistication. But everybody else has to go through some channel, and the channels that you go, like I always say, b'chol levavcha, then comes b'chol nafshecha, then comes b'chol meidecha. So why can't you just jump to b'chol meidecha? Because it doesn't work that way. First, you have to do what you could do before you go to, like what the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 15 in Tanya. He says, when you learn 100 times, it's not called avodah in the Gemara and Menachos, because that custom then was that they studied everything. It wasn't called avodah. 101 times, he says, now you're an Eved Elikim. Why? Because you went out of your regillus. You went out of your routine. But you know what? You can't reach 101 if you don't do 100. So like the Rebbe once told somebody who got drunk on Purim, the Rebbe said, before you have Adala Yoda, you have to have Yoda. You know? So an idiot is going to drink and say Adala Yoda. Yeah, very nice. First you need to know Baruch Mordechai and Arud Haman before you come to Lo Yoda. You understand my point? Of course there are moments all of us can just reach a place like that. Look, you have Yom Kippur, you have Simchas Torah, you have moments of grace where God allows you, gives you an additional surge. We all have moments like that, but you can't. But it's not Tmidin Kesidran. You can't build your life on that. Those are magical moments. That's like moments when you fall in love. That's moments when you have a child, a simcha of a chasana, a beautiful event. These are all tremendous moments, but they're like the gather of a nest. Now you have to bring it into the structure. And I want to really say this. I think that there's always the temptation. Can we reach nirvana? Can we reach this level with a little shortcut? And I have to tell you, there are no shortcuts. The Rabbeim, Chassidus is the best shortcut, but it's not a shortcut. It's a derech arucha ktsara. You got to do the work. There's really no way around it. What can I tell you? But I will say this, because we're in the Deir HaShvi, and we come after thousands of years of Aveda Mesiras Nefesh, and the Rebbe told us we stand on their shoulders. So we're not coming alone. Besides, he doesn't say this here, but besides everything else, we also are a cumulative energy. It's like you have a marathon has been run. We're just asked to do the last few steps. So we're not going alone. So that's why we have a lot of koyach. But to imagine that you were just going to automatically, we can't think like that. In Chassidus, there's no automatic. Now, if Mashiach comes right now and he catapults us all in, even though we're not fully ready, please God, we all hope for that. But you can't build a strategy around that. In other words, we wait for Mashiach, but we still have to do something this morning. If the daven, prepare for Shabbos, learn Chassidus, learn Shiurim. In other words, there's no Zaveda. The thing is that we have to stay away from mechanical Judaism, mitzvahs anoshim ulamada, because that does not let you get to places like this. When you do mitzvahs mechanically, maybe better than nothing, but it doesn't let you get outside of your routine. Your routine leads you to further routines. If you want to reach higher, you got to push. That's why Chassidus Aveda was always, you got to break something. I don't mean in a bad way. I mean, you got to break a habit, a routine, a pattern, a little more. They're 101 to tip the scale. Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. I really believe when the Rebbe said about Mashiach, that's what he wanted. You have to push it a bit more. We would have loved the Rebbe should just do it. But the Rebbe said, I did everything I can. Why? There's something we need to shift. I don't just mean quantitative, qualitative. What the Rebbe's words in that Sikha Chof Ches Nissen. The Iker is going from the Golos HaPnimi, the inner Golos. Because we're trapped. We're trapped in our routines, our comfort zones. That's why I believe, be very honestly, that this COVID-19, this pandemic, is God's way of waking up and say, it's not business as usual, my friends. There's some things happening. Now, we all wish it wouldn't happen with any casualties and loss and health and issues, but that's God's mysterious ways. But there's no question in my mind, because it all comes down to that. And, all of Chassidus is built on one thing, a hazazah. You have to shift a bit. It's not even dramatic, but it cannot be yesterday, cannot be today. Everything that little shift. Look at the Rebbe. I pushed himself all the time. Never said, "Oh, okay, we did enough. Ready for vacation. Let's go retire. Let's wait for Mashiach." It's not how it works. So it's not comfortable, to be very honest. I'm just like you. We all like to be able to say, okay, Shabbos is coming. I'm going to kick off my shoes. I'll sit down on the couch and learn a little chassidus with a little drink on the side. The fact of the matter is, there's a side to us that wants a little more. We want some. How much work do we have to do? But at the end of the day, when you learn chassidus, especially you want to enter the Holy of Holies, these levels, it's not going to come easy. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's not going to come automatic. It's not just, okay. And I'm saying it because, honestly, when I read these lines, it's so easy to go into the intellectual side of how do we understand paradox and beyond paradox. It's fascinating. But really, I say to myself, this is all about bringing out haflas ha'atzmus. It's not about us trying to understand things in an awesome way. And there's a certain, like I mentioned from the Rebbe Rashab and Teir Shalom, I love that line where he says, he talks about similar subjects, very deep stuff. He says, when you speak about these deep things, it was not about understanding it so much. It's It's just a tremendous line. When you know with whom you're dealing, you just have a different derech eretz. You have different respect. You start reading this, you say, even Kol Yachol doesn't define Atzmos, God Almighty. You know, you think Kol Yachol, it's like he could do anything. He's capable of everything. No. So you could think, okay, that's like telling us that we're little children and we'll never understand. No, it's the opposite. This is a gift. It's telling us, you know, you're dealing with something that's completely a different reality. That's like it's the mystery of it is actually more uplifting than if you got it.
So that means that Bli Gvul is not Atzmos.
No, for sure not. And neither is Gvul, for sure not. 1 second, but I want to say this. I wanted to just finish my line. This is a gift. In other words, if someone were to say, I can understand this, I would tell you that you're not getting where you have to be. It's nice to understand, but it's far greater to be taken by the mystique of it. You know, the mystery of it. You know, you've ever seen a natural wonder. You see something like, awesome. It's awesome. And the beauty of it is because you don't contain it. If you contained it and controlled it, it loses its magic. The whole point of it is that it's beyond you and you lift it up to another place. But you know what? Human beings like control. Let's be honest. And because we like control, we want to control that as well. Like I once told a guy, he was having issues. He was, you know, it was marriage issues. So I said, don't you understand that love is about letting go? That love is not about owning it. You know, you own enough properties and enough commodities. You're not going to own your spouse. You're not going to own love. He says, no, I want to own everything. So I said to him, but certain things are not ownable. You know what he told me? He said, there's a price for everything. Maybe I can own it without feeling like I own it. You know, he wants to even have the things you can't own. He also wants to own. He'll pay more. He'll pay more money to own love or truth or atzmos. My point is that it's actually an exercise of recognizing certain things you don't control. And that's not a weakness. That's not an inadequacy. It's actually a truth. I can tell you how many times around the Rebbe, you could see the Rebbe was always in awe of something beyond him, in awe of God. It wasn't just he was a great man and knew how to learn Torah and was charismatic and a dedicated person. The people like that are always, you see, in touch with something that's beyond them. And that's where there's a deep humility always. It's never, oh, I'm a great person. Look how, there's a certain moment. The Rebbe didn't sit on his chair completely. He always sat at the edge because the Frierdiker Rebbe once sat in that chair. I mean, this type of things are like, they're through and through. Your whole being is not about me.
That's why, because the Frierdiker Rebbe was sitting like that.
Yeah, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a mimer in the Rebbe's room once. And after that, that's what I heard many times, the Rebbe would never, first of all, he wouldn't sit, the only Yechidus, he sat in that chair. He would sit in other parts of the room. And even when he sat, they say he always sat a little on the edge. Yeah.
But that was a different chair.
You'll have to ask, I don't know the details. I just know the concept. Let's put it this way. If you find that different, the bitlu was there. In other words, what it personified great people. What was the greatest compliment to Moshe Rabbeinu? That he was the humblest man on earth. So my point is that bittul is not weakness. Bittul means it's not all about me, and that allows you to experience something beyond. And I really think that's the entry point. And we have to fight the temptation of wanting control. I mean, there's no way around that. What can I tell you? Now, interestingly, once you have the bittul, it becomes part of you, but not because you own it, not because you decided that. It's not about, it's a combination of these two forces. It's true love, by the way, true love, not about me or about you. You have to let go, and then you get true love, and then you're enriched in the process. Remember, not annihilating the person either. The challenge is the Tzimtzum created a self-conscious. We have a certain identity of self, and that is important to have. But the goal is that it should connect with the Yesh HaNivra, with the Yesh HaMiti. Going back to the language here, Okay.
Rabbi
L'chaim.
L'chaim. Rabbi Jacobson.
Sure.
First of all,
Ani l'daydi. 1 second. Ani l'daydi v'daydi li. That's what it's about, right?
Amen. A good Chodesh. True. Unbelievable learning this today and recently. I'm just totally spoiled by everything you're teaching. But truthfully, this level of that we're talking about of atmas, that you say the only way we can even get somewhat to it is tachlis habittul. So I would suggest, I don't know, or ask that even with tachlis habittul, so Moshe Rabbeinu or Mashiach Tzidkenu, there's still no way that a human being at the highest level can ever truly understand atmas. It's a totally different level. It's totally different. It's not even our getter of human ability to relate to that on even a very deep level, let alone a tachlis level. It's like, the way I'm thinking about it, it's like, if we were never given the sense of hearing or the sense of seeing, we could talk about it maybe, but we would never really understand it if we never had a sense for it. And so we don't have a sense to access us. It's impossible, I think, from what you're explaining. So, well, my point here is that Mitzvah, well, even if we could ever achieve that, it's just so far removed from Atmos uniting or whatever.
I hear you. My take on it is completely opposite of yours, just for the record.
Okay.
Because, let me tell you why. First of all, the same God that created, the same God that's Atzmus, that's beyond it all, created it all. So every step that we take, every baby step, even when we use our seichel, it's all created by Atzmus. The same Atzmus that's beyond it all created it all. So what you're doing now, you're doing the exact opposite of what he wants to say here. He wants to say when you're Atzmus, it contains it all. And that negates it all. So that means even though we, in our structures, cannot understand how it all comes together, but it all comes together because Atzmus put it there. So when we learn Aleph Beis, you're learning Aleph Beis that has in it the Bligvul and beyond Bligvul, and all the Atzmus is all there. The thing is, how much can you relate to it? So when we do a small mitzvah and we start climbing, every step you're getting an experience of Atzmus, whether you know it or not. That's number one. Secondly, because Seichel itself was created by God, so Seichel touches beyond Seichel, as I mentioned before. And therefore, we're dealing here with a relationship that we must do our part. We do our part, and all kinds of things could happen. What you're doing is you're defining a business plan. And you're saying our business plan can never connect to God's business plan. No, and I'm saying to you, don't create no business plans. God did it already. He told us, I'm giving you a Torah, I'm giving you mitzvahs, do what I'm asking you, learn Chassidus, try to understand as much as you can, and as you allow it to take over your life, instead of you trying to control it, you will begin to experience more and more of me. Now, is there a goal? No, who says there's a goal? There's no goals. This isn't as I said, it's not a business that you're working toward. We're going to make $1 million this year, 20 million. The goal is God makes the goals. Obviously, we'd love to hear Mashiach is coming. That's the goal. I wouldn't even call it that. Mashiach's coming is an experience of a stage where existence has become elevated through a lot of years of Avodah to that place. But then the journey continues. So I think you have to look at it more instead of pitting, oh, we'll never get there or so on. I don't see it that way at all. I think we get there every second. It may just not be on your terms. And you may not understand how it's happening. Like, tell me, when you give a penny into a pushka, a child puts a tzedakah in a pushka, we know it touches Atzmus in some way. Can you explain me how? My answer is yeah, because who says shava mashvekatim v'gadol? Who tells you that only dramatic things are important? Maybe one little thing has all of Atzmus in it. So what we're learning here is that Atzmus is not defined by anything, but he created definitions. And when we work with those definitions and don't let ourselves stand in the way and see ourselves as being so vital in the whole thing that our self-consciousness becomes so important, we can become absorbed, that we can also come to a point where definition and non-definition meet. How that's going to feel or look, I'm not going to be able to describe that. I think each of us are going to experience it differently. And I think when you let go and you experience something greater than you, whether it's in love or other ways, then you have some taste of it. So I don't see this as a limit. I see this as on the contrary. Atzmus invested himself in all the definitions. Atzmus itself is beyond Gvul and Bli Gvul, but he created Gvul and Bli Gvul, and therefore within them lie Atzmisdika powers. Now, we initially definitely are not aware of it, but when you learn about this, you start becoming aware. I'm just using, remember, it's not just bittul, it's also limud Torah and kiyam mitzvahs and avodas atfilah and avos Hashem and yiras Hashem. All these things add up to a methodology that allows us to absorb and become part of a greater reality, even to the highest levels. And it's a very different experience. Yes, it's a very different experience when you're sitting and strategizing how to make parnasa than when you're busy, the bittul that you have on Yom Kippur connecting to higher levels of Yechidah. But they're all part of the necessary process. Everything is part of it. Everything is Ashgacha Pratis and everything has that. So I think I look at it much more like a holistic system here. And just it's a gift, a blessing from God that God created us, that we have the ability to travel on this journey. Now, it may not be a contradiction to what you said. I'm just saying my take on it is that's how I would approach it. Okay. Let's stop here. On top of page, I'll read one more line because it's an interesting line. So he says like this. So in Giluyim, Gvul and Bli Gvul are different. And one does not contain the other, or does not receive the other. In Atzmus, Shneim and Matzmus. Actually, I'm going to stop right here because the next line, he's going to start talking about how Bli Gvul allows us to relate to Atzmus more in some ways. The same thing with Gvul. So the bottom line is, my friends, we live in a world of ribuy and ischalkus. There's a lot of multitude and diversity. Now we know that that's all part of Atzmus plan, just as much as unity is. So when we do our work in each detail and we create Achdus Hashem, we recognize godliness, we are in a journey of joining all the fragments. That's what Dira b'Tachtenim means. That Tachtenim, the way we are limited Tachtenim, where we see Gvul and Bli Gvul as different, and every Gvul is a separate entity. When we come to understand all of this, and we do all our work in every step of the way, including understanding some of these deeper things we're learning now, to the best of our ability, we in some ways are finishing the job, we're partnering, and basically allowing Atzmus to be revealed, even in a world that does not relate to all the different, even the difference between Gvul and Bli Gvul, let alone what Atzmus is like. So that's exactly the challenge. How in our type of reality, which is a Metzias Nimtza and all its definitions and so on, can we ultimately experience the highest of highs? You know why? Because Atzmus is that way. And that everything that exists is ultimately comes from Atzmus, except we need to come to recognize that. And that's the challenge, of course. Okay. The plot thickens. So we'll stop at the top of page 86 and we'll continue on. Let me